The warm June sun filtered through the pine trees as 18-year-old Liam carefully loaded the last of the camping gear into his old blue sedan. His girlfriend Chloe stood beside him, her dark hair tied back in a ponytail, checking items off their list one more time. They had been planning this trip for months, ever since graduation became a reality rather than a distant dream. 3 days in Pine Ridge National Park, just the two of them, celebrating the end of high school and the beginning of whatever came next. Chloe's mother appeared at the front door of their house, worry written across her face despite her attempt at a supportive smile. She had already made them promise to text every evening, to stay on the marked trails, and to be careful around wildlife. Liam's parents stood in their own driveway next door, having given similar warnings mixed with encouragement. The two families had lived side by side for nearly a decade, watching their children grow from playground friends to high school sweethearts. As they pulled out of the neighborhood, Chloe reached over and squeezed Liam's hand. They had been together for 3 years, through proms and finals, through college applications and rejection letters, through the bittersweet realization that they would be attending different schools in the fall. This trip was supposed to be their perfect goodbye to this chapter of their lives, a memory they could hold on to when everything else changed. The drive to Pine Ridge took 4 hours, winding through increasingly rural roads until civilization gave way to towering evergreens and rocky outcroppings. They sang along to their favorite playlist, stopped for snacks at a tiny gas station that looked like it hadn't been updated since the 70s, and took selfies at every scenic overlook. By the time they reached the park entrance, the afternoon sun was beginning its slow descent toward the horizon. The ranger at the entrance booth was friendly but thorough, making sure they had proper permits and knew the basic safety rules. He handed them a map with the approved camping areas circled in red pen, warning them that straying too far from designated sites could result in fines or worse, getting lost in the vast wilderness that stretched for hundreds of miles in every direction. They chose a campsite about 2 miles from the parking area, following a well-worn trail that ran alongside a babbling creek. The spot was perfect. A small clearing surrounded by tall pines, with enough space for their tent and a fire ring made from carefully arranged stones. A fallen log served as a natural bench, and the creek provided a soothing soundtrack that made them feel like they were the only people for miles around. Setting up camp took longer than expected. Neither of them had much experience with actual camping, despite watching dozens of online tutorials in preparation. The tent poles seemed determined to go in every direction except where they were supposed to, and it took 3 attempts to get the rain fly properly secured. But eventually, as the golden hour light painted everything in warm tones, they stood back to admire their temporary home. Liam started gathering wood for a fire while Chloe organized their food supplies in a bear-proof container the ranger had insisted they rent. They had brought enough for 3 days of simple meals, mostly things that could be cooked over a campfire or eaten cold. As darkness began to creep through the trees, they heard footsteps on the trail. A man emerged from the shadows, probably in his 50s, with greying hair and the kind of deep tan that comes from spending most of your time outdoors. He wore well-used hiking boots and cargo pants with multiple pockets, each seemingly containing some piece of outdoor equipment. His backpack was considerably larger than theirs, the kind serious hikers used for week-long treks into the backcountry. He raised his hand in a friendly wave as he approached, keeping a respectful distance from their campsite. His name was Marcus, he explained, and he was setting up camp just around the bend, maybe 100 yards away through the trees. He had been hiking these trails for 20 years, knew every hidden waterfall and scenic viewpoint worth seeing. When he learned this was their first real camping trip, his face lit up with the enthusiasm of someone eager to share their passion. Marcus spent the next 20 minutes giving them advice about the best trails for beginners, which areas to avoid because of recent bear activity, and how to properly store their food to avoid attracting animals. He showed them how to tie a better knot for their bear bag rope, and pointed out which plants were safe to touch and which would leave them covered in an itchy rash. His knowledge seemed endless, delivered with the patient tone of a favorite teacher. As their conversation wound down, Marcus reached into one of his many pockets and pulled out a small plastic bag filled with colourful gummy candies. They looked like regular gummy bears, but in unusual colours, bright blues and greens and oranges that seemed to glow in the firelight. He called them Sunny Patch Kids, explaining that he made them himself using all natural ingredients and herbs he collected on his hikes. They were his secret weapon for long trail days, he said, providing sustained energy without the crash that came from regular candy. Chloe accepted the bag with genuine gratitude, immediately trying one and commenting on the unusual but pleasant taste, somewhere between fruity and earthy. Liam took one too, more out of politeness than real interest. Marcus wished them a good evening and headed back toward his own camp, his flashlight beam bouncing through the trees until it disappeared completely. They spent the rest of the evening sitting by their fire, roasting hot dogs on sticks Liam had carefully sharpened with his pocket knife. They talked about everything and nothing, the way they always did, jumping from topic to topic without any real pattern. College was the elephant in the room they both tried to ignore, focusing instead on the present moment, the crackling fire, the stars beginning to appear overhead in numbers they had never seen back home. Chloe pulled out her phone to text her mom as promised, struggling to get enough signal for the message to send. Finally, the little delivered notification appeared under her simple update that they had arrived safely and set up camp. Liam did the same, adding a comment about how incredible the stars looked out here, away from all the light pollution of the suburbs. They stayed up later than planned, neither wanting the day to end. They shared more of the gummy candies Marcus had given them, finding that they did seem to provide a pleasant energy boost. Eventually, though, exhaustion from the day of travel and setup won out. They carefully extinguished their fire, making sure no embers remained, and crawled into their tent. The next morning brought confusion to the park. A ranger on routine patrol noticed the tent still zipped tight well past the checkout time noted on their permit. Rangers were used to people oversleeping on vacation, so at first he simply called out a friendly greeting, expecting to hear embarrassed voices from inside. When no response came, he called out again, louder this time. Still nothing. Following protocol, he carefully unzipped the tent entrance. Inside, he found sleeping bags that had been slept in, 2 cell phones, 2 wallets, and car keys. But Liam and Chloe were nowhere to be seen. Their shoes were gone, suggesting they had left the tent at some point, but everything else remained exactly where it should be. Even the expensive camera Liam had received as a graduation gift sat in the corner of the tent. The ranger immediately called for backup. Within hours, the peaceful campsite transformed into a search operation headquarters. Local police arrived first, followed by Park Service investigators, and eventually volunteer search and rescue teams. They established a grid pattern, systematically searching every trail, every possible path the couple might have taken. The investigators found no signs of struggle at the campsite. The tent showed no tears or damage, no blood, no disturbed earth, no indication that anything violent had occurred. The only footprints they could identify belonged to Liam and Chloe themselves, and those only went a short distance from the tent before becoming lost among the pine needles and rocky ground. They interviewed other campers in the area, but most had seen nothing unusual. A few remembered seeing a young couple matching their description on the trails the previous day, looking happy and taking photos. One person mentioned seeing an older man talking to them, but could provide no useful description beyond that he seemed to be just another hiker. The search expanded over the following days. Helicopters flew overhead. their searchlights cutting through the forest canopy. Trained dogs were brought in, given items of clothing to establish scent trails. They followed promising leads that ultimately led nowhere, ending at creek crossings where the trail went cold, or at rocky outcroppings where no scent could stick. Liam and Chloe's families arrived at the park, devastated and desperate for answers. They pleaded with investigators to keep searching, to check every cave, every ravine, every possible place two teenagers might have gone. They created social media pages that quickly gained thousands of followers, all sharing the photos and information in hope that someone, somewhere, had seen something. The police examined the couple's phones, looking for any clue about what might have happened. The last text messages had been sent to their parents the evening they arrived, positive and normal. No calls had been made after that. The phones had simply sat in the tent, batteries slowly draining, receiving increasingly frantic messages from family and friends that would never be read. As days turned into weeks, the active search had to be scaled back. The Park Service couldn't maintain such a massive operation indefinitely, though they promised to keep the case open and continue investigating any leads that arose. Volunteer groups continued coming on weekends, covering the same ground again and again, hoping to spot something everyone else had missed. The case attracted media attention, particularly in the couple's hometown. Local news stations ran regular updates, which mostly consisted of reporting that there were no updates. Internet sleuths created elaborate theories about what might have happened, ranging from animal attacks to alien abductions, to the couple simply running away together, though none of these theories fit the evidence. Marcus, the helpful hiker, had left the park the morning the couple was discovered missing, before anyone knew to look for him. He had checked out normally at the ranger station, mentioning nothing unusual. No one had thought to get his last name or contact information. He was just another face among the hundreds of people who passed through the park every week during camping season. 3 months passed with no breakthrough. The intensive search efforts had long since ended, replaced by periodic checks by rangers and the occasional volunteer group. The families held on to hope, but it was the desperate kind that comes from having no other option. They couldn't begin to grieve properly without knowing what had happened. Then, October arrived, bringing with it a lone hiker named Janet, who preferred the trails when they were less crowded. She was experienced, the type who ventured slightly off the main paths to find the hidden gems that casual hikers missed. She was following a deer trail that ran parallel to the main hiking route when she spotted something unusual through the trees. It was a camping chair, the collapsible kind, sitting alone in a small clearing. It seemed odd to find it there, so far from any designated campsite. As she approached, she could see it had been there for a while, covered in pine needles and showing signs of weather damage. She almost walked past it, but something made her stop and look closer. Tucked into one of the chair's cup holders was a small plastic bag. Inside were what looked like gummy candies, though they had an unusual appearance, their colours still bright despite months of exposure. The bag was labelled with handwriting that said Sunny Patch Kids in black marker. Janet had heard about the missing couple on the news, and something about finding abandoned camping equipment so far from the normal trails made her uneasy. She carefully picked up the bag without opening it and marked the location on her GPS. As soon as she got back to where she had cell service, she called the park rangers. They might have dismissed it as random litter, but given the ongoing case and the strange location of the find, they decided to investigate. The forensics team that arrived treated the scene with the same care they would give to any potential evidence in a missing persons case. They photographed everything, collected the chair and the candy, and searched the surrounding area for any other items that might have been overlooked. The bag of gummies was sent to the state crime lab for analysis. When the lab results came back a week later, they changed everything about the investigation. The gummy candies contained massive amounts of THC, the active ingredient in marijuana, at concentrations that would be dangerous even for experienced users. But that wasn't all. They also contained traces of a powerful sedative, the kind that could cause confusion, hallucinations, and complete loss of motor control when combined with THC. The investigation immediately shifted from a missing persons case to a potential crime. Someone had given or sold these dangerous edibles to the couple, possibly without their knowledge of what they really contained. The forensics team went back to the original campsite with new purpose, looking for any other evidence of drugs or foul play they might have missed. They found nothing else at Liam and Chloe's campsite, but the discovery of the drugged candy gave them a new avenue to pursue. Detectives began investigating illegal drug activity in the area, particularly focusing on anyone known to make or distribute homemade edibles. It didn't take long for a name to surface. Marcus Chen, though he usually went by just Marcus, had been on local law enforcement's radar for over a year. Several college students in the nearby town had reported getting violently ill after consuming homemade edibles they had purchased from an older man who hung around campus. The students had been too afraid of getting in trouble themselves to file formal complaints, but the incidents had been noted. When investigators pulled Marcus's driver's license photo and created a photo lineup, things began falling into place. The ranger who had checked him out of the park that morning recognized him. More importantly, 2 other campers who had been in the park that weekend identified him as the friendly older hiker they had seen talking to various young campers, always eager to share his knowledge and stories. Marcus lived in a rundown trailer about an hour from the park. When police arrived with a search warrant, they found equipment for making various cannabis products, including gummy candies. More disturbing, they found several pieces of camping equipment that didn't seem to belong to him, including a woman's hiking boot that matched the description of what Chloe had been wearing. Under interrogation, Marcus initially maintained his innocence, claiming he had never seen the missing couple. But when confronted with the evidence, particularly the matching chemical signature between his homemade edibles and the ones found in the park, his story began to change. He admitted to making the candies, but claimed he only sold them to willing adults who knew exactly what they were getting. The detective conducting the interrogation pressed harder, pointing out the impossibly high concentration of drugs in the candies, levels that would be dangerous for anyone. They told Marcus that they would find the bodies eventually, and that cooperating now might make the difference between life in prison and the death penalty. The pressure finally broke him. Marcus's confession came out in pieces over several hours. Yes, he had met Liam and Chloe at their campsite. Yes, he had given them the drugged candies, though he claimed he had warned them they were special and to only eat 1 or 2. His real intention, he insisted, had been to wait until they were incapacitated and then rob them. He had noticed the expensive camera, the new phones, and figured college kids probably had cash too. But things had gone wrong. The couple had eaten more of the candies than he expected, probably thinking they were just regular candy with a little something extra. Within an hour, they were both completely disoriented, barely able to walk. He had tried to lead them away from their campsite to somewhere he could go through their belongings without being seen. But Liam had become paranoid and aggressive in his altered state. A struggle had ensued, during which Marcus claimed Liam had attacked him. In defending himself, Marcus had pushed the young man, who fell and hit his head on a rock. Chloe, too drugged to fully understand what was happening, but seeing her boyfriend hurt, had started screaming. Panicked about attracting attention, Marcus had covered her mouth to quiet her, accidentally suffocating her in the process. The rest of his confession detailed the cover-up. He had dragged both bodies deep into the woods, to a cave system he knew from his years of hiking. He had taken what cash they had, but left everything else, thinking missing persons would draw less attention than obvious robbery. He had forgotten about the extra bag of candies he had dropped in the camp chair when he first sat down to talk with them. Marcus led investigators to the cave 3 days after his confession. It was nearly 2 miles from the original campsite, in an area that had been searched but not thoroughly, as it was considered too difficult for lost hikers to reach. The bodies of Liam and Chloe were recovered, finally providing their families with the closure they desperately needed, though not the kind they had hoped for. The autopsies confirmed that both teenagers had consumed dangerous levels of THC and sedatives. Liam had died from blunt force trauma to the head, consistent with striking a rock. Chloe's death was ruled as asphyxiation. Both deaths were classified as homicides, with the drug intoxication listed as a contributing factor. Marcus was charged with 2 counts of murder, along with charges for manufacturing and distributing illegal drugs. During his trial, it emerged that he had approached other young campers over the years, always with the same friendly demeanor and helpful advice. Some reported accepting small gifts from him, though none had experienced anything like what happened to Liam and Chloe. The prosecution argued that Marcus was a predator who specifically targeted young, inexperienced campers. They presented evidence that the concentration of drugs in the candies was far beyond what anyone would use recreationally, suggesting he had deliberately created them to incapacitate victims. The defense tried to argue that the deaths were accidental, the result of a robbery gone wrong, but the jury didn't buy it. Marcus was ultimately convicted on all charges and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. During the sentencing, both families gave impact statements, describing the devastating loss of their children and the agony of not knowing what had happened to them for months. Chloe's mother spoke about how her daughter had been excited about studying environmental science in college, hoping to become a park ranger herself one day. Liam's father talked about his son's passion for photography, how he had saved money from his part-time job for over a year to buy that camera found abandoned in the tent. He had dreams of becoming a photojournalist, of traveling the world and telling important stories through images. Both young people had bright futures ahead of them, cut short by someone they had trusted because he seemed kind and helpful. The case led to increased safety measures at Pine Ridge and other national parks in the state. Rangers now maintain a database of regular visitors, requiring more detailed registration that includes photo identification. They increased patrols of remote camping areas and instituted mandatory safety briefings that specifically warn about accepting food or drinks from strangers, even in seemingly safe outdoor settings. The park also created a memorial for Liam and Chloe at the visitor center, a small plaque reminding people that while nature itself can be dangerous, sometimes the greatest threats come from other humans. Their photos, taken from their final happy days before the camping trip, show 2 young people full of life and love, unaware of what awaited them. The families established a foundation in their children's names, dedicated to educating young people about safety while traveling or camping. They speak at high schools and colleges, sharing their story not to scare people away from outdoor adventures, but to make them more aware of potential dangers and the importance of trusting their instincts when something feels wrong. They emphasize practical safety tips like camping in groups when possible, letting multiple people know your exact plans, and being extremely cautious about accepting any food or drink from strangers, no matter how friendly they seem. They also advocate for better regulation of homemade edibles and stronger penalties for those who use drugs to facilitate other crimes. The story of Liam and Chloe serves as a heartbreaking reminder that evil can hide behind a friendly face and helpful demeanor. Their trust in a seemingly kind stranger cost them their lives, turning what should have been a celebration of their achievements and future into a tragedy that destroyed 2 families and shocked an entire community. The bag of colourful candies, such an innocent-looking thing, had been the key to unravelling the mystery. Without that single piece of evidence discovered months later by chance, Marcus might never have been caught. He might have continued approaching young campers, offering advice and gifts, waiting for another opportunity to strike. Other victims came forward after Marcus's arrest, sharing stories of uncomfortable encounters or strange experiences after accepting food from him. While none had experienced the tragic outcome that befell Liam and Chloe, several reported feeling unusually drowsy or disoriented after eating things he had given them. They had attributed it to exhaustion from hiking, never suspecting they had been drugged. The investigation revealed that Marcus had been escalating his behavior over time. What might have started as selling homemade edibles to college students looking for a high had evolved into something far more sinister. He had discovered that the isolated nature of camping spots provided perfect opportunities for crimes, with victims often far from help and witnesses. The detective who led the investigation later said it was one of the most disturbing cases of his career, not because of its violence, but because of how calculated it was. Marcus had spent years perfecting his approach, learning exactly how to make people trust him, how to appear helpful and harmless. He had turned the generally trusting nature of the outdoor community into a weapon. The case also highlighted the vulnerability of young people transitioning to adulthood. Liam and Chloe, at 18, were legally adults, but still learning to navigate the world independently. They had grown up in a safe suburb where neighbors looked out for each other, where accepting kindness from strangers wasn't seen as dangerous. Their innocence, while beautiful, had made them perfect targets for someone like Marcus. In the months following the trial, both families struggled to find meaning in their loss. They found some comfort in the foundation they created, and in the knowledge that sharing their story might prevent similar tragedies. They received letters from parents whose children had changed their camping plans to be safer, from young people who had learned to be more cautious, from park rangers who had implemented new safety measures. The spot where Liam and Chloe had camped was eventually returned to use, though many campers familiar with the story chose to avoid it. Those who did stay there sometimes reported an eerie feeling, though whether that was due to knowing what had happened or simply the power of suggestion was impossible to say. The creek still babbled peacefully, the trees still provided shade, but the innocence of the place had been forever tainted. The hiking community, both locally and online, had extensive discussions about the case. Many expressed anger that Marcus had exploited the traditionally open and helpful culture of outdoor enthusiasts. Others emphasized that this shouldn't stop people from being kind to fellow hikers, but that kindness shouldn't override basic safety precautions. Some questioned whether the Park Service and law enforcement could have done more to prevent the tragedy. If Marcus had been on their radar for drug-related activities, why hadn't he been arrested earlier? The truth was that without solid evidence or formal complaints from victims willing to testify, there had been little authorities could do beyond keeping an informal watch on him. The case became a cautionary tale taught in criminal justice programs, an example of how predators can use unexpected methods and settings for their crimes. It showed how something as seemingly harmless as candy could become a weapon, how trust could be weaponized, and how the isolation that many seek in nature can also make them vulnerable. For the town where Liam and Chloe had grown up, the tragedy brought the community together in grief and determination. The high school created a memorial scholarship in their names, awarded each year to students planning to study environmental science or photography. The local camping store instituted free safety classes, teaching both basic outdoor skills and awareness about potential human threats. Their friends struggled with survivor's guilt and what-ifs. What if someone else had gone on the trip with them? What if they had chosen a different campsite? What if they had been suspicious of Marcus's gifts? These questions had no answers, only the painful recognition that sometimes terrible things happen despite everyone's best efforts to stay safe. The legal proceedings had one unexpected positive outcome. Marcus's arrest and the publicity around the case led to several other victims of drugged food crimes coming forward, not just in that state, but across the country. It sparked a broader conversation about the use of drugs to facilitate crimes and the need for better education about this danger. Law enforcement agencies began sharing information about similar cases more effectively, recognizing that predators like Marcus often operated across jurisdictional boundaries. The case contributed to new legislation increasing penalties for using drugs to facilitate other crimes and requiring stricter labeling and regulation of homemade edible cannabis products. The families of Liam and Chloe found themselves reluctant advocates, thrust into a role they never wanted, but embraced as a way to honor their children's memories. They spoke at conferences, consulted with park services on safety protocols, and worked with legislators on new laws. Through their pain, they fought to ensure other families wouldn't experience the same loss. As time passed, the acute pain of loss settled into a constant ache. Birthdays, holidays, and graduation seasons were particularly difficult, marking milestones Liam and Chloe would never reach. Their bedrooms remained largely untouched for the first year, shrines to the teenagers they had been and the adults they would never become. Eventually, both families found ways to move forward, though never moving on. They celebrated their children's lives rather than focusing solely on their deaths. They shared funny stories about them, displayed their photographs, and kept their memories alive in positive ways. The foundation became a source of purpose, turning tragedy into action. The final truth of what happened during those last hours remained known only to Marcus, and his version of events was likely sanitized to minimize his culpability. The toxicology results suggested Liam and Chloe would have been severely impaired, possibly hallucinating, certainly unable to make rational decisions or physically defend themselves effectively. Their final moments were likely filled with confusion and fear, a terrible end to what should have been a joyful adventure. The story serves as a reminder that while we want to trust others, especially in communities built around shared interests like hiking and camping, we must balance that trust with caution. It reminds us that predators don't always look dangerous, that they often appear helpful and friendly, using kindness as camouflage for their true intentions. The bag of candy that solved the case sits in an evidence locker, a small colourful reminder of how something so innocent in appearance can hide something deadly. It represents the key that unlocked a mystery, brought justice for two young victims, and potentially prevented future tragedies by exposing a predator who had hidden in plain sight for years. The story of Liam and Chloe is ultimately about more than just their deaths. It's about the love they shared, the dreams they held, the families who continue to mourn them, and the community that came together in the wake of tragedy. It's about the importance of safety without paranoia, caution without isolation, and the ongoing need to protect the vulnerable from those who would harm them. Their legacy lives on through the safety measures implemented in their memory, the young people who learn from their story, and the ongoing work of their families to prevent similar tragedies. While nothing can bring them back or undo what happened, their story continues to resonate, reminding us all to be aware, be careful, and to trust, but verify when encountering strangers, no matter how helpful they might seem. The peaceful trails of Pine Ridge National Park continue to welcome thousands of visitors each year. Most have wonderful, safe experiences, creating the kind of memories Liam and Chloe should have made. But park rangers now watch a little more carefully. Campers are a bit more cautious about accepting gifts from strangers, and everyone understands that the beauty of nature can sometimes hide very human dangers. If you found this story compelling, please hit the like button, subscribe to Nest Stories for more, and share your thoughts in the comments below.